From the Oregon State University's Extension Service, you are listening to In the Woods with the Forestry and Natural Resources Program. This podcast aims to share the voices of researchers, land managers, and members of the public interested in telling the story of how woodlands provide more than just trees. They provide interconnectedness that is essential to your daily life. Stick around to discover a new topic related to forests on each episode. Welcome back to another episode of In the Woods. I'm your host, Lauren Grand, Assistant Professor of Practice and Extension Agent in Oregon State University's College of Forestry. Today's topic is dealing with difficult situations. Our guest today is Emily Jane Davis. Emily Jane is an Associate Professor in the Department of Forest, Ecosystems, and Society, and a statewide Extension Specialist in Collaborative Natural Resources Management. She's an applied social scientist who studies partnerships and collaboration in natural resources. Welcome to the podcast, Emily Jane.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm really glad to be here today.
So I want to get started by asking you sort of an overview question. What does it mean to deal with difficult situations in forestry or forest relationships?
So when we think about difficult situations, we'll be talking today specifically about those kind of interpersonal situations that get difficult and that we don't really have training or skills to deal with as normal people. Essentially, we'll be talking about how to deal with conflict, which is an inevitable part of living in the world with others. And it's not something that can always just be totally avoided, but it can also be an opportunity for growth and change. So if you're listening to this podcast, you might be a landowner who has conflict within your family about how you're going to manage your property in the future, or with your neighbor about the risk of wildfire or a fence line. Or you might be someone who's participating in a group like a watershed council or a forest collaborative, and there's different people in the room at those meetings that seem to have different values or views about natural resources. So all of those are forested environment situations where you might experience conflict.
Great. Yeah, I talk to a lot of landowners about sometimes having issues with neighbors or family. So hopefully this will be a really good resource for them.
I hope so. And I'll just throw in a caveat that this is a topic that people go to school for, dedicate their careers to. You know, we have whole books about it, whole courses. We're just scratching the surface today. And we're also facing quite a lot of substantial conflict in our society and in our value systems. So this podcast is not going to fix the world, but it's intended to give you as an individual just a couple tools to start thinking about what conflict is and how you respond to it and how you might engage more productively. So that's kind of what I hope you'll get out of it as a listener.
That sounds great. Although I feel like we should strive for world peace every day, right?
I mean, that's always a good goal, Lauren. But so I'll start by talking a little bit about conflict, because I don't know about you, but I never got any training in school. I never took any classes. There's just, it was kind of just something I observed around with family and friends. It's just not something we get a lot of resources to deal with. So I'm going to ask you, like, when you hear the word conflict, what kinds of associations do you have? What other words come up for you with the word conflict?
Oh gosh, the first thing that comes to my mind is definitely anxiety. Yeah, you never want to feel like you're in conflict with someone. Things like disagreement and fighting come up, or, like things like not getting what you want. But I also like to think that if I'm having a conflict with someone, we get some sort of resolution. And so the word compromise also comes up for me.
What I like about what you just said was how you talk about what we might think of as the negative aspects of conflict. So the ways that it makes us nervous, that we're not sure how to deal with it, or the unpleasantness of being at odds with another person. All those are arguably negative. But then you also mentioned the possibility for resolution or solutions as well, which is kind of the positive side of conflict, but not necessarily one I think we automatically think of, right?
Oh, absolutely. Anxiety and nervousness and negative things definitely were at the forefront of my mind when you asked.
So then how do you think you've learned how to deal with conflict in your life and in your career? Have you had any chances to learn how to deal with it?
For most of my life, no. More recently in my career, I've been able to attend some trainings, but definitely had to try to learn on the fly when I was in conflict with someone.
Mm-hmm. That's really challenging because you're nervous, you're kind of in the moment, and you're not as sure what to do. So I understand that. Conflict is really hard for us to deal with because we're doing that. We're kind of learning on the job. We're learning as we go. And we're often put in situations where we don't have time to plan. We're just stuck reacting. And for some of us, that's a mode we're more comfortable in than others. And it's hard for us to deal with because of that and because we don't have training or background. So I think that's something that's good to start talking about is, how do we start dealing with conflict? How do we start equipping ourselves to better deal with it? And I think something that, we should think about is that we're all different people. We have different styles. We have different communication modes. So not all of us are going to deal with conflict in the same ways. And then also not every conflict is the same. And so not every conflict is going to lend itself to the same approach. So I think Lauren, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about identifying what I call conflict styles, which is really important for a few reasons. It can help you understand how different approaches might or might not work given different situations. And then also knowing what kind of conflict style you have as a person can help you figure out how to work with conflict in ways that are going to draw on your strengths and also what to do when you get into some weaknesses. So how does that sound to you?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Before we get going into it, I think I should give a shout out to our awesome Forestry and Natural Resources Extension colleague, Nicole Strong. So Nicole and I originally worked together to develop that, a workshop built around this built around the idea of difficult situations and how do we deal with conflict as individuals. And I just wanted to recognize her. And Lauren, you've also given this workshop with her before too. So shout out to our pal, Nicole.
Yeah, she definitely has taught me a lot about this topic.
Yeah, for sure. I think something that's great about it too is how do you bring structure to it, right? Instead of it just being, oh my gosh, conflict. What are some concepts we can use to kind of break this down and make it more approachable? And that's what the conflict styles can be about. So I'll start with one conflict style. One of the ways people deal with conflict is to be accommodating. So this means they're willing to forego their own interests in favor of others. They might step down on their goals a little bit. And they might do this when it's really important to preserve harmony and avoid disruption. They might realize, wow, this issue is more important to the other person or people that I'm in this conflict with, so I can step down a little bit. It's a good approach when you realize that you're wrong. And it's also a good approach if continuing to compete and have disruption just wouldn't be a good approach to conflict. So you're kind of willing to accommodate the interests of others in a conflict. So Lauren, is this a style you feel like you have used some in your work or in your life? Is this a natural style for you? Not to put you on the spot.
That's okay. Actually, while you were talking, I was thinking, this is definitely a style that I'm more likely to use in my personal relationships because I don't want to fight as much or, be in conflict as much with those people that I really care about. And so as you were talking, I was thinking, oh, maybe I do give in quite a bit to some of the people I really love.
Yeah, but sometimes preserving that harmony is really important when relationships are at stake. So as you're noting, this is really important when relationships matter. And so as a landowner dealing with family issues, there may be times when preserving your relationship with the people in your family is somewhat more important or is really important compared to your land management goals, for example, something like that. So this is a good one for when you're trying to protect relationships. But it's not easy, right, to be accommodating. So thinking about some of the skills you might need to have to be an accommodating conflict style person, you have to be able to listen to people, right? You have to be able to hear what they're saying and understand that. You have to be able to understand their concerns. So something we call active listening, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You have to be able to take the back seat without being afraid about losing your power or influence, which isn't always easy. And so essentially you're accepting that you're not going to win every time. You're not always going to have your way. So those are the things you need to accommodate. And then I think another conflict style that really does this too, and that's pretty similar, is what we would call a collaborating conflict style. And this is definitely more true when we're talking about a conflict that involves multiple folks, not just two people having an interpersonal conflict. And it's really about trying to find collective solutions that are going to work for everyone. It's seeking that ideal win-win outcome. And we tend to want to use this approach when there's a lot of interdependent, complex issues going on, and we need an integrative solution that's going to try to address them all. And you want to innovate, you want to try something new, and you really genuinely want everyone to get something out of it. Lauren, have you participated in any kind of collaborative meetings or projects or processes in your work?
Yeah, I've participated in quite a few, a lot of meetings where we're trying to do some planning and program development. And it's interesting. There's always a lot of voices and a lot of people that have a lot of opinions about things going on. And it's hard to sort of make everybody happy.
Right. What do you like about that setting? What do you find enjoyable about a collaborative approach?
I really enjoy the different voices that are in the room and hearing about the values that each person brings, and how the decision that we make together can actually be better because we're hearing all those different values and can incorporate them into the decision that we make. And sometimes some really cool things come up, things I never would have been able to think of on my own.
That's great. The academic literature agrees with you on that too, right? These are all the kind of ideal outcomes that we think we're supposed to get from collaboration as a conflict approach. Okay, but it's not always roses. So what's hard for you about it? Be real.
What's really hard is it's really difficult to get what you want, right? There's usually somebody in the group that is the exact opposite of you, or, is fighting you hard on a situation. And, you might have to find ways to compromise on some of the things that are pretty important to you. So I think that's one of the difficult things with that type of style.
Yes, that's some real talk. And it's often hard to have this style as an individual in the room. This is a style, though, that, say, a facilitator or a mediator really needs to have, right? If they're the ones helping create a process and make it fair for everyone. So either as a facilitator or as someone who's trying to practice this conflict style, you really have to be able to understand opposing viewpoints on all sides of an issue, which can be really difficult when it's someone whose viewpoint you really don't relate to, or it's not your background. How do you get all the issues out on the table without intimidating people or causing them to feel defensive? How do you look at that information all objectively when it's really value laden, and then decide what to do with it? How do we best move forward with this? And how do you really see the root cause of a problem? Those are some of the skills we need for a collaborative conflict style. So wow, that one's hard work, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
So both collaboration and then the previous one we talked about, accommodating, those are conflict styles that are really heavy on cooperation and and those are really important when there's relationships at hand. But there are other conflict styles you could use when relationships are less important and other things might be more important to you. So avoiding might be one that a lot of us are familiar with, right? Because conflict is seen as negative in our society and it makes us anxious. So why not avoid it, right?
Oh yeah, definitely do that sometimes, especially when I don't know the person or, I'm not dedicated to the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Those are some of the conditions under which an avoiding style might actually be appropriate. It's actually it can be a really viable approach when there's going to be no good outcome from engaging, or it's a dangerous situation, and there's a variety of ways that you or others might be unsafe. Also, maybe it's, the issue is insignificant enough that it's not worth the energy, the disruption, all of that. So it has some things in common with an accommodating style, right? You're willing to forego your own goals or preferences. Issues at hand are not as important as preserving harmony or safety. But you just, sometimes there are times when you really want to avoid conflict. Another good time to do it is if you actually are going to need more information before taking action or making a decision. So not wading into the conflict without the information or resources that you need. So I was trying to think about sometimes when avoiding conflict, when I've done it and when it hasn't worked out for me, because sometimes avoiding it is not good. And I've had, situations where I'm working with a partner in a work situation, and I realize we don't have the same understanding of what our goals are, and we're not working towards the same goals very effectively. But I don't like the tension that's coming up around that. So instead of just going to that root issue, I'm like, this is great, end the meeting, we're done. But over time, obviously that doesn't lead to very productive dynamics on a project or in a relationship. So by not stepping back and saying, I think we need to talk about why we're having conflict or what's going on here, I was just making the situation worse. I don't know if you've ever gotten into one of those where you realize, like, I had some short-term gains from avoiding this, but in the long term, I should have not avoided it.
Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely in similar situations where working on projects where you sort of hold things in because you don't want to make it more difficult or cause a conflict at that point. And then later on, it ended up being something that should have been brought up a lot sooner, for example.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last conflict style I'm going to talk about today, which is not a cooperative conflict style, is competing or hard bargaining. So you're in there and you really want to get what you want, and you're not going to compromise and you're not going to accommodate. This would be a situation where perhaps you just really could not compromise on these values. They were so important to you. It was so critical that you just could not compromise. It often sometimes when there's difficult or unpopular decisions to be made where there really isn't a lot of compromise available, or situations that require a quick decision with little time to debate the issues as well. And we kind of tend to think of this, I guess this might sound like a negative approach, but there are situations when this can work out. But it's not easy to do. It's not a conflict style that comes naturally to me, because you have to be able to know when and how to assert yourself. You have to have like a tenacity to keep pushing forward your case, even if you're being attacked by others. You have to be really clear about what your position is and why. And you have to be able to organize and make a strong case. So I would say that I don't see this conflict style a lot in my work, but I don't know about you. Have you seen this much?
Yeah, I see it every once in a while, mostly with people who aren't often working in these group projects that I'm working in. So if I'm working one-on-one with someone and they're asking me a specific question about something and they have a passion about it, or, sort of call me when they have an answer to, they're asking me a question and they sort of have the answer they want, but I give them a different answer, is usually when I have this style sort of comes up for me a lot, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I think I spend a lot of my time in this collaboration space where everyone's already primed and wanting to be on their best collaborative behavior. So maybe that's why I see it less. So those were some different conflict styles. And I think you as a listener might reflect a little bit, which one do I find myself using the most? How do I know it when I see it? And do I think it's the right one for the situation I'm in? I think that's the key take home here, is that it's not that one of these is necessarily always better than the other, but it's about understanding the situation and how others are working with you. And then is that really the appropriate mode for it? You also heard me mention a few times the importance of active listening. And Lauren, if you're good with it, let's move on and talk about that a little bit, because that's another big tool for understanding how you can better handle conflict as an individual. So we talked about, one, understand your conflict style, figure out how to work with it when it's appropriate and not appropriate. And then two, we all really need to learn active listening skills and practice those, and they don't come easily. So case in point, Lauren, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. I'm going to read off some poor listening habits, and you can tell me, in all honesty, which ones of these you think you're guilty of doing. And we're all guilty of many of them. So,
oh boy,
the
here
first
I go, revealing
one.
myself.
Here we go. All right. So when someone else is talking, Lauren, how often are you not paying attention, distracted by something else?
Oh, yes. I definitely find that this happens. I try really hard not to do it because I actually realized at a point when I was a little bit younger that I was doing it a lot. And it wasn't something I wanted to do. So unfortunately, it still creeps into my life, but this is when I actually actively try to to decrease as much as I can.
Yes, and you shouldn't be too hard on yourself because it's so hard to pay attention when we have so many demand. We're all multitasking. There are a lot of different platforms that we're using. We're on the phone, we're on Zoom, we're in person, we're managing our lives and our work situations. So don't be too hard on yourself about this one, but it's kind of inevitable. I don't know if you have any techniques that you've been using to try to overcome that. Sometimes I try to take notes if I notice I'm having a hard time paying attention, and that forces me to focus on what I'm doing. Have you found that helpful for yourself?
Oh yeah, notes is a great way. If it's a situation where I don't have notes, I try to repeat things that they've said in my head so that it makes me realize that I have to focus, so I can't think about something else.
That's a great one. Okay. Here's another one, rehearsing. So while the other person is talking, you're winding up what you'd like to say, and you're kind of running through what you're going to say in your head.
Oh yeah, I definitely do this during an active argument.
Getting your comeback ready.
Oh yeah, I got to be smart and quick.
And there's times when that's good, but this, as we think back to those conflict styles, this reduces the ability to hear what the other person is saying and understand maybe what's their motivation, what's their value, what are the underlying issues here, or the root cause. So it can be a particular detriment to a collaborative conflict style. That's okay. How about this one? This is one that I am really bad at. This is probably my number one poor listening habit. Interrupting, not waiting until the speaker has stopped talking and cutting in mid-sentence.
Yes. Unfortunately, I also do this one too. I've been pretty good today. I'm listening to you, but
you're modeling.
I'm trying to be good. Yeah, when you get so excited about something that you want to share, or sometimes that sneaks in, and I notice it, and it's also one that I try to step back on because I want to hear what people have to say. But it's hard.
This is really hard. For me, this comes from a place of excitement. I get so excited about what they're saying, and I want to chime in with like, me too, or I totally agree with that. And so it comes from, I think, a good place, but it can have a pretty bad effect.
Yeah, definitely. I just thinking when people do it to me, you feel like they don't want to hear you, or what you have to say isn't as important. So, I know I have a hard time. I do it, but I also hate it when people do it to me. So it takes some practice, I think.
Same. And I like what you just described there, because it gets at how this hampers active listening, because it can give the impression, even if you don't mean it, that you aren't paying attention, or that what they're saying isn't as important as what you'd like to say. And so that can really hamper working together on conflict. Another one is feeling defensive. So while you're listening to someone talking, you feel like you see an intent there to criticize you, or you feel like you know why they're saying what they're saying and you don't like it. And then you're kind of set up feeling like you're being attacked. This one you feel like you experience much?
I can't say that one happens with me too much.
This one happens less with me as well. Sometimes I worry that I'm not being taken seriously because of age or gender or something like that. And that can affect how I'm listening to someone. But I always try to step back and just listen to what they're saying. And I also sometimes try to think, if I hear something that I think might be critical, I try to either think, one, that might be about them and something that they're processing and not to do with me. Or I think, two, maybe there is something I could be learning here. Maybe they're giving me some information that I need to consider about myself. Try not to take that so personally, but see it as a learning moment. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Okay, so those are some poor listening habits. When Nicole and I put this list out in a workshop, there's always all these groans, and I can see people cringing, like, oh no, we do all of these things. And then they're all feeling bad, like, okay, what should we do? What can we do about this? So how can we do it better? How do we have more effective, active listening? Well, first of all, I think you and I talked about this a little bit already, right? Pay attention. So just reduce distractions in the moment that you're in, the situation you're in. Take notes if that's something appropriate and you're able to do that. Turn off other devices or things that might be sending you messages if that's possible. And these are important both to keep your focus, but also to signal to the other person or people that you're giving them your attention, that they're worth your time. So that's really important. Another thing that's a little harder to do, it's less tactical and more of a skill, is listening for the whole message. So it's not just literally what are they saying, but what are the other cues, the nonverbal cues and the underlying meaning, essentially. Have you noticed sometimes when you're talking with people, you're picking up on some of those, and those are giving you extra clues about what's going on?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you can always tell from someone's body language if they're, uncomfortable in what they're saying, or if there's still something more they want to say, but they just seem to not be in a space to feel like they can. Or there's definitely sometimes when I'm talking to people where I can pick up on those little things and try to draw out some more information, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's really wise. So just that idea of listening for the whole message, it's listening for what's said, but also what might be unsaid. And largely in body language or those nonverbal cues. And that also can be a clue to the person's conflict style, right? So if they've got their arms folded, they're looking down, they're avoiding eye contact, their sentences are kind of short, they might be avoiding, for example. It helps you better understand where they're at. Here's another one. It's really hard. Hear before you evaluate. So this is about just taking in the information without immediately starting to move to conclusions. I find this extremely difficult as a trained academic because we're supposed to immediately start evaluating evidence, right, and coming up with conclusions. But so it's kind of hear without judgment, take in as much information as you can, ask clarifying questions if you need to, just so you can better know what is this person saying, what is that whole message. You know what I mean? How do you feel you're able to do it this? I find this super hard.
I also find it really hard, and I'm glad that you talked about it today because it's helpful to have a reminder to ask clarifying questions. I think it's really important to make sure you get the whole picture.
Yes. You know what? Thanks for bringing up clarifying questions. I'll rattle off a few really good ones that you can just put in your toolbox. So you might say, please tell me more about that. Can you share some examples? Have you encountered this before? And if so, what did you do about it then? Do you have any other ideas or options that would feel fair to you? So these are some of the kinds of questions we might ask to hear before we jump to judgment. Another thing we might do is we try paraphrasing what we heard too, right? So speaking back to someone what you think you heard them say, but putting it in your words. And this can be a good way to clarify shared understanding and make sure you were hearing them correctly, as well as maybe offer a different framing to them. So that can be constructive as well. I don't know. Have you tried that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm glad you brought that up because that's one I really like to do, especially when I'm still evaluating or thinking about my response. I try to reframe what someone said and ask them if I'm understanding correctly, just to make sure that I can get my thoughts together before responding. I love that technique.
Yeah, it does so many things because it helps you reflect back to them and shows that you were listening. It also allows you to potentially reframe something across a communication or conflict style difference. So it just has so many benefits. So I hope that when we think about conflict now, having talked about it for a little while, we realize, one, we can use an understanding of our conflict style and other conflict styles to better navigate it, and that we can be smart about those bad listening habits, poor listening habits, and then how we can move forward with some more effective ones. I might sum up a few other tips to take home in the toolbox for conflict resolution. Have you heard of it's the ABCD model? Have you heard of this before, Lauren?
I haven't. I'm excited to learn something new, or some more things new.
So A stands for achieve rapport. So that means you try to make the other party feel sufficiently comfortable. You make yourself comfortable. You establish some trust. You kind of just achieve an understanding that you're here to work together, that kind of thing. So that's the A in ABC. After a while, you can B, boil down the issues. So that's after you've spent time listening, asking questions, getting the whole story, all of that. But then you kind of boil down what the key issues are, rather than having a whole bunch of them out there undifferentiated. So this is a really key step. So that's the A, achieve rapport, B, boil down the issues. C is clarifying all of the wants. So not making assumptions, asking some of those clarifying questions we just talked about, just really finding out what the interests and goals are and making sure you're working with those true underlying needs. And then D is developing a game plan to work on those and being collaborative in how you develop those if possible. Brainstorming possible solutions together, being really clear about what you can do or what they could do, discussing a timeline, roles and responsibilities, all those things. So that's ABCD: achieve rapport, boil down the issues, clarify needs and wants, and develop a game plan. That's, summarizing a whole world of complex human interaction in a few words, but I find that one is helpful for coming into my mind when I'm nervous or I'm on the spot in a conflict, right? Devices like that are easy to pop into our head and use. So do you see that being something you could use in your work at all?
Yeah, so definitely something where you can sort of take a deep breath and say, how can I handle this better? And then, say that in your mind and then start to act it out. That will help you get through one of those difficult situations.
That's great. That's what we're all about. It's so hard when you end up in a difficult situation. As we were talking about when we got started, we have negative associations with conflict. It feels bad. We don't like being uncomfortable and we don't like hurting other people's feelings. But with some of the tools we talked about today, I think that this should help you move forward with a variety of conflicts you might be encountering in your own context as a landowner, as a forestry professional, as a manager, all of those things. What do you think, Lauren?
Well, I think that these are some really great tools, and I hope that we can all find ways that we can use them in all of the situations in our life. But even, if you have an issue with a landowner or with, a neighbor, I think that these are really great things to be able to use to make sure that you stay on good terms with each other.
Awesome. And world peace, right?
And world peace, of course. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Emily Jane, but do you have just maybe a short example of a conflict that, is maybe common between forest landowners or in a family situation as an example of how someone might be able to use this in their everyday life?
Yes, one that we've seen a fair amount in the workshop setting when we've done this as a workshop is fence line disputes. So either it can be something like exactly where is the fence line, or even if that's known, how are others interpreting the fence line and what's going on there? So it could be something like who's responsible for a tree that's right on the fence line that needs care, or someone is spraying something right up to or across the fence line, and there's a dispute about that. What's challenging about those situations is oftentimes they're escalated, right? So it's not that you have a lot of time to think about it in advance. Something's already happened. Someone's upset about something. The spraying has already occurred, or a fence has been put up in technically the wrong location, and someone's uncomfortable about that. So all of the things we talked about today would still apply, but particularly active listening, as well as managing one's own emotions, particularly if you're the one who's really concerned about what's going on. So we've worked a lot talking with landowners about how to step away from the initial conflict and kind of trading back and forth in the current situation, tit for tat, and instead trying to go back and understand, why did this happen? How did this happen? What motivated you to put the fence here without talking to me, or what motivated you to spray this? What are your concerns and goals as a landowner? And just apply those active listening skills to try to diffuse the situation, and then move forward with coming up with solutions in a collaborative way, ideally, right? Because you're both landowners, you're both managing in the same area. So how do you look for win-win solutions if possible, or solutions that are going to be fair and appropriate? How do you constructively try to create those together rather than telling someone this is how it's going to be? That's something that we've seen come up a fair amount.
Yeah, definitely. I actually just had a phone call from a colleague a couple of weeks ago on this very topic, that he was having trouble helping, or he was helping a landowner who was having this very conflict and wanted to talk through some options to help out the landowner. So it's very common. And what was really fun is that while you were describing what you should do as the landowner in that situation, I was telling myself, oh, look, she's going through the ABCD acronym that she just gave to us. So that was really fun to think about.
Oh my gosh, you're such a good student, Lauren. You're already using the ABCD model. But yeah, and that it's totally that. Like, you would seek to, achieve that rapport with the landowner despite the conflict and diffuse things. You would try to really identify, boil down the issues, try to clarify, like, why did this happen? What do you need as a neighbor? And then what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to approach it together and not against each other? So, yay, I'm glad that was working for you.
Well, you're a good teacher. Thank you. So is there any, before we close, is there any last minute points or summaries that you want to give to us about dealing with difficult situations?
I think the key thing to remember is that even when they feel hard or overwhelming, or you're really angry or you're really upset, take a few deep breaths and then realize that there are a lot of tools and strategies you could use to deal with this, and start trying to remember those in your mind. And I think it's almost like muscle memory. So getting to remind yourself of those and practice them as much as possible. Say, okay, what's my conflict style? What do I think their conflict style is? Are we using the right conflict style for this situation? And when all else fails, just move back to, how can I practice active listening right now? How can I really hear what's going on and what we're going to potentially need to deal with here? So just remember, you have a whole toolbox available to you, and some of the things we talked about today are just the beginning of that.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Emily Jane. I had a really good time talking about conflict and some tools that we could use to help minimize negative effects from conflict. Before we fully wrap up, I have a few questions that I would like to ask you. We're going to enter our lightning round and the questions we ask all of our guests. So tell me, what's your favorite tree?
It's hard because there are so many. I really like quaking aspen and the way their leaves flutter, and the colors in the fall.
Those are gorgeous. My forestry professor taught me about quaking aspen. They always used to say it's like they're waving to you every time the wind blows. It always felt so romantic. Okay, so what is the most interesting thing that you bring with you in the field, whether you have it in your cruiser vest or in a field kit?
my ability to ask questions. I'm just carrying that with me all the time because it helps me practice active listening. It's also, as a qualitative researcher, I interview people for a living, and I think it's a really interesting tool. It's not literal, though. Sorry.
No, I think that's great. It's our first non-literal tool, and I love it. Okay, lastly, what resources would you recommend to our listeners if they're interested in diving a little bit deeper into this topic?
There are tons of resources online out there about conflict. I would seek out ones that talk about conflict management, not necessarily conflict resolution, although those are good too. I also always recommend that you can go further and learn about your own leadership style. So what kind of leader are you? How do you communicate? How do you hear information? How do you use information? There are a lot of good tools that can help you better assess what kind of leader, what kind of learner you are. And that's really complementary to how you deal with conflict.
Okay, great. Do you have one or two that maybe we might be able to put up on our website that you can share with me?
Sure, I will do that.
Okay, great. So we'll make sure to have those up on the website so you can look up some resources for some conflict management. Okay, great. Well, that concludes this month's episode of In the Woods. I want to thank you all for listening today and stay tuned for next month's episode. Talk to you then. But for now, what's in your woods? Thanks so much for listening. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on our website, blogs.oregonstate.edu/inthewoodspodcast. We'd love to hear from you. Visit the Tell Us What You Think tab on our website to leave us a comment, suggest a guest or topic, or ask a question that can be featured in a future episode. And also give us your feedback by filling out our survey. In the Woods is produced by Lauren Grand, Carrie Berger, Jacob Putney, Stephen Fitzgerald, and Jason O'Brien, who are all members of the Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Team. This podcast is made possible by funding from the Oregon Forest Resources Institute. Music for In the Woods podcast was composed by Jeffrey Hino, and graphic design was created by Christina Freehoff. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we can't wait to talk to you again next month. Until then, what's in your woods?